Have you ever looked at your child, and I mean really looked, and felt like something's changed, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Maybe they still call, still show up on birthdays, still smile politely, but something's missing. That closeness you once had, the warmth in their eyes, the ease in your conversations, it feels a little thinner now, a little more distant. You're left wondering, when did we stop being so close? And why don't they turn to me the way they used to? If that question has ever touched your heart, you're not alone. Many people over 60 quietly carry this ache, even if they don't say it out loud. It's not about blame or guilt. It's about understanding a simple truth. Human connection evolves with time. But that doesn't mean we can't nurture it again. In fact, some of the most powerful tools to rekindle that connection come from ancient wisdom, timeless principles that have guided people through life's challenges for centuries. Now don't worry, this isn't going to be a lecture on old philosophy. What we're talking about today are real, practical psychological strategies. Gentle shifts in how you speak, how you show up, how you carry yourself, things that, once understood, can change the way your child sees you, feels about you, and yes, prioritizes you again. These strategies aren't about manipulation. They're about awareness, about learning how the human mind responds to presence, silence, storytelling, and sincerity. And when these things come from a place of calm confidence, something beautiful happens. You stop chasing connection and start attracting it. Let me take you on this journey. Just you and me, having a heart-to-heart. No pressure, no judgment, just wisdom, passed down and lived through. And the first step? It may surprise you. Let's talk about mystery. Not the kind in detective stories, but the kind that lives quietly within us. You see, as parents, we often feel the need to explain ourselves, to offer everything on the table, to share, advise, repeat old stories, hoping it'll bring us closer. But here's the paradox. The more predictable we are, the less magnetic we become. There's something powerful about holding a bit back. Not because we're hiding, but because we're letting people lean in. When you reveal everything at once, there's no space for curiosity. And curiosity, my friend, is what makes people want to be near you. Think about this. When your child talks to you, do you feel the urge to give them advice immediately? What if next time you simply nodded, asked one thoughtful question, and let a little silence fill the air? It may feel odd at first, but watch what happens. They'll start to wonder what you're thinking. They'll start to value your words more because you don't offer them freely all the time. It's not about withholding love. It's about inviting them to discover you again. Someone once said, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." And these days the world's so loud, so much talking, so much oversharing. When you choose to speak less and with more intention, your words begin to carry weight. You become the calm in the noise. The person they start to look toward, not just out of habit, but out of trust. That brings us to the second strategy, and it ties so closely to the first. You might already be using it without realizing: silence. Have you ever noticed how the quietest people often hold the most influence? It's not because they're timid. It's because they've learned to listen. Not just hear, but listen. And not only to words, but to the emotions behind them. Sometimes your child may be venting about work or worried about a decision. The temptation is to jump in, to solve it, to share a similar story, to help. But silence, when used with kindness, creates space. And in that space, people open up. They reflect. They trust you more because you're not trying to fix everything. You're simply there, steady as ever. You might be thinking, "But if I don't say anything, won't they think I don't care?" Not at all. In fact, it's the opposite. When you pause before responding, when you look them in the eyes and simply nod, they feel seen, truly seen. You're not rushing to speak, you're honoring their voice. There's a reason the wisest among us have always encouraged listening more than speaking. As one old saying goes, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Wise, isn't it? Try this the next time your child visits or calls. Just hold back a moment. Let them speak fully, even through silence. Don't fill the quiet. Let them fill it. What you'll notice is that people often reveal more than they intend, not because they're careless, but because they feel safe. And here's where silence becomes power. When you choose your words carefully, when you resist the urge to respond quickly, your child begins to see you as wise, grounded, a person whose presence brings clarity, not clutter. It's a small change, but it's like tuning an instrument, a gentle adjustment that shifts the entire sound. Now, you might be wondering, what about the moments when I do need to speak? How can I make sure what I say actually lands? That leads us to our third insight, one that has moved nations, passed down traditions, and shaped every meaningful connection since the beginning of time: storytelling. Before there were books, before there were smartphones, there were stories. Around fires, under the stars, told by those with weathered hands and kind eyes. Stories have always had the power to reach places that facts can't touch: the heart, the imagination, the soul. When you share something with your child, not as a lecture but as a story, you invite them into your world. Instead of saying, "You should do this," you say, "I remember a time when I faced something similar." And suddenly, they're not being taught. They're experiencing. Let's say your child is struggling with something. Maybe they're burned out. Maybe they feel stuck. Instead of offering a list of advice, you tell them about a time in your own life when you felt that way. You describe the sights, the smells, the doubts, and how you found your way through. Not with triumph necessarily, but with truth. That's what makes a story powerful. Not perfection, but honesty. People connect with what's real. And when your story makes them feel understood, they begin to feel with you. And that, more than anything, builds connection. Your child may not remember every tip you've given them, but they will remember how your story made them feel. And in those feelings, they'll find wisdom, and they'll find you. So now, we've begun to explore these quiet, powerful ways to draw your child back toward you, not with demands, not with guilt, but with presence, patience, and gentle influence. Let's keep going. There's more to discover, and with each step, we get closer to understanding how timeless wisdom can bring us closer to the people we love most. You know, one of the most beautiful things about growing older is that we carry stories not just in our minds, but in our very presence. When you walk into a room, you carry decades of living, of loving, losing, learning, and beginning again. And yet, so often, we forget the quiet influence that kind of life experience holds. It's easy to think, they don't see me the same anymore. Especially when your child is caught up in the whirlwind of adult life, juggling work, their own children, responsibilities. But here's the truth. Your value hasn't faded. Sometimes it's just hidden beneath layers of familiarity. And that's where the next strategy comes in. Something deeply human, yet often overlooked. Reciprocity. Think back to the last time someone did something kind for you without asking for anything in return. Maybe it was a neighbor who brought you a warm meal, or a stranger who helped carry your groceries. You likely didn't forget it, did you? Because kindness, real, quiet kindness, stays with us. It lingers. Reciprocity isn't about keeping score. It's not, "I did this, so now you owe me." It's about creating a space where generosity flows naturally. When you give without expectation, whether it's your time, your attention, or simply a warm cup of tea and a listening ear, something shifts. Your child might not say it out loud, but deep down, they feel it. They remember it. And it builds a kind of loyalty that can't be forced. You might be thinking, "But I've already done so much for them." And you're right. You've given years of your life, your energy, your love. But in this new chapter, the giving looks different. It's quieter, more intentional. It might be sharing a favorite book that changed your perspective, or offering to help with something small, watching the grandkids, preparing a meal, or just calling to ask how they're doing without slipping into advice. The magic of reciprocity is that it doesn't shout, it whispers. And those whispers build trust. Over time, they shift the relationship from duty to desire. Your child won't just visit because they should, they'll want to. Because being around you feels like comfort, like wisdom, like home. But don't mistake kindness for self-neglect. That brings us to another essential truth, one that may feel counterintuitive at first, but is absolutely transformative. Prioritize yourself. You see, there's a certain quiet power in people who know their worth. Not loudly, not arrogantly, but with gentle certainty. The kind of person who walks into a room and doesn't need to prove anything. That kind of presence draws others in. It starts with the way you treat yourself. Are you speaking to yourself with kindness? Are you nourishing your body, your mind, your spirit? When was the last time you did something just for you? Not because someone needed you to, but because it brought you joy. Someone once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that strength? It's magnetic. When your child sees you living fully, not just existing, but thriving, they begin to admire you all over again. You're no longer just their parent. You become a role model for resilience, for balance, for dignity in aging. That inspires them more than any words ever could. Taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's a signal to the world and to your family that your time matters, that your needs matter. And when you treat your own life as valuable, others start doing the same. So go ahead. Take that walk you've been putting off. Read the book that's been sitting on your shelf. Say no when you're too tired, and yes when your heart says yes. Light the candle, play the music, drink the good tea. When you live like your presence matters, people notice, and they begin to treat it like it does. And speaking of presence, that leads us to a form of connection that's often underestimated, but holds enormous power: the act of truly listening. In a world filled with noise, interruptions, and people just waiting for their turn to speak, there's something rare and sacred about someone who listens, not to respond, but to understand. You've probably seen it before. Your child is sharing something important, and before they even finish, someone jumps in with advice, a correction, or a story of their own. That shuts people down. But when someone leans in and says, "I'm listening," and means it, walls begin to fall. Real listening isn't about fixing anything. It's about saying, "I hear you. You're not alone in this." And when your child feels heard, truly heard, something beautiful happens. They begin to trust you with more of themselves. The little things, the real things. And in that space, relationships deepen. Sometimes the most powerful words you can say are, "Tell me more." Then you sit back, you listen, and you let them be seen. And if you can pick up on what's not being said, the sigh between their sentences, the change in their tone, that's when you really start to connect. People crave understanding, especially from those they love most. So when you become the one who listens without judgment, without rushing in with a solution, you become a rare presence in their life. And rare things? They get treasured. You don't need to change who you are to reconnect with your child. In fact, the more you come home to yourself, the more magnetic you become. These shifts, cultivating mystery, honoring silence, telling your stories with heart, giving generously, prioritizing your well-being, and listening deeply, they aren't tactics. They're invitations. Invitations for your child to see you again. Not as someone fading into the background, but as someone full of presence, depth, and strength. Let's keep going. There's still more to uncover in this journey of reconnection, not just with your child, but with yourself. If you've made it this far, I want to pause for a moment and say, you're already doing something rare. You're choosing to grow, to reflect, and to reconnect, even in a world that so often tells older people to step aside. But here you are, leaning in. That alone speaks volumes. Now let's continue, because these last few insights may be the most powerful yet. Not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they work quietly beneath the surface, where real change begins. You may have noticed something throughout your life. The things we can't always have, the people we can't always reach easily, they tend to stay in our minds longer. It's not about games or being difficult. It's about understanding human nature. And that's why one of the most subtle yet powerful strategies for deepening connection is creating a sense of scarcity. Now, I know that word, scarcity, can sound cold. But think of it more like this. When you value your time and your presence, others do too. If you're always available, always the one to pick up, always saying yes, people may unintentionally begin to take that for granted. It's not because they don't love you, it's because as humans, we often overlook what feels constant. But when you begin to show up in measured, meaningful ways, when you offer your energy, your stories, your help with intention, it becomes something to look forward to, something memorable. Imagine being at a family gathering. Everyone's chatting, noise is all around, and you choose not to be in every conversation. Instead, you find one moment, maybe just 5 minutes, to sit with your child and say something heartfelt or share a quiet laugh. Then, without overstaying or pushing, you step back and let the moment breathe. It lingers. It matters. Because it wasn't expected. It was cherished. Scarcity isn't about disappearing. It's about making your moments matter. When you do that, your presence becomes something people feel lucky to have. And that kind of presence, rare, rich, intentional, makes people prioritize you not out of habit, but out of desire. Now let's talk about something even more personal, your emotions. Over the years, you've seen a lot. You've probably had moments where you were angry and held your tongue. Times when your heart was broken, but you still showed up. That emotional resilience, it's one of your greatest strengths. But here's something that might surprise you. Even now, you can deepen that strength. You can become someone whose emotional presence actually calms the room. When you master your emotions, not suppress them, but understand and guide them, you become someone others instinctively turn to. When your child is overwhelmed, your calm helps them feel safe. When they're anxious, your grounded tone reminds them everything's going to be okay. You don't need to say much. Sometimes just being steady is enough. But this takes practice. When something upsetting happens, maybe your child forgets to call or speaks sharply, take a breath. Before reacting, ask yourself, what part of me is hurt? And is it worth feeding this feeling or guiding it? It's often said that we can't control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. That's power. And when you respond with grace, with clarity, with emotional steadiness, you become a safe harbor. Your child may not even realize it at first, but they'll start coming to you more, not because they have to, but because they want to be around that kind of peace. Emotional mastery isn't about never crying or never feeling. It's about knowing how to stay present even when the waves rise. And when you model that, you show your child what strength truly looks like. But perhaps the most surprising strategy of all, the one that ties everything together, is this. Be willing to walk away. Not in anger. Not to prove a point. But from a place of deep self-respect. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back, not because you don't care, but because you care enough to stop chasing what no longer honors your presence. Let's say you've been trying to reconnect with your child. You've called, texted, extended invitations, and the response has been cold or distant. It hurts. Of course it does. But continuing to pursue with desperation only erodes your sense of self. That's when walking away, even just temporarily, becomes an act of quiet dignity. You're not slamming doors. You're simply choosing to stand tall in your worth. You're reminding yourself and them that your time, your heart, your life is not something to be overlooked. And here's the paradox. The moment they sense you're no longer clinging, they start to lean in. Because independence is magnetic. When you show that you're whole on your own, that you're living fully whether or not they're constantly there, they begin to remember what makes you special. You become less of a duty and more of a treasure. It's been said, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. That quote speaks to this exact moment. When you stop craving constant connection and begin cultivating your own richness, your peace, your joy, your hobbies, your friendships, you stop being invisible. You start shining again. And suddenly, the child who once overlooked you, they begin to wonder. They begin to notice. They begin to miss something. And that something is you. Let all of this settle for a moment. You don't need to do it all at once. You don't need to be perfect. Just begin with one small shift, one pause, one deeper breath, one story shared from the heart, one act of kindness without expectation, one moment where you choose to walk with dignity instead of chasing validation. The truth is, you've never lost your ability to be deeply loved, valued, and prioritized. Sometimes all it takes is remembering that your presence has always held power, and that power doesn't fade with age. It deepens. You have something this world needs. Not more noise, not more chasing, but presence, wisdom, calm, and love. The kind that listens, gives, and stands tall, even when it's quiet. If this spoke to you, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, which of these touched your heart? Which one will you try first? And if you want to see more gentle, empowering insights like this, go ahead and hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Because you matter, and it's time the world remembers that. Here's to being heard, being seen, and being you. At any age. You're not fading. You're rising.